Vince is one of those guys who, you know, he had been using his talents to, I mean, he's drawn Batman and Superman posters, and he's the real deal. Right?
Yeah.
But he was one of those guys who was a free thinker who'd come out of a hugely sort of oppressive religious background. And when our paths crossed, he was like, I want to use my gifts to be able to try to be a part of the conversation. And, you know, when people ask me, what can I do? They think being an activist means you have to stand behind a podium on stage or you have to have a podcast. And I always start with, well, what are you good at? And then what do you love? And then find a way to make that part of the conversation. So
let's do that now, because we got Matt in Leavenworth, and I think that relates to his question.
Oh, forgive me. Go ahead.
You there, Matt?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So Seth was already giving an answer to your question of sorts, but I thought you'd...
Yeah, I'm kind of thrown off by that. That's awesome, though.
Well, flesh it out for me, though. I mean, what did I miss?
Well, I was, you know, I just listening to both shows, both the Thinking Atheist and the Atheist Experience, for quite a while now. I've kind of had this like deeper inner drive to just go out in the world and not just have conversations with theists, but to maybe start thinking about actually taking action and doing something. And I mean, I consider myself to be a good communicator and somebody who's become familiar with some of the classical arguments for theism, et cetera. But, you know, I really haven't given it a whole lot of thought myself. But I'm really, this is actually a question for a future generation. I'm actually ripping off of a conversation that I think it was Matt and Dawn had recently about your job security. And you guys were talking about how the ultimate goal of the show was to not have to have the show anymore, right?
Yeah. Atheism, as far as atheist activism, the primary goal is to make sure there's no atheist activists, no need for any atheist activists anymore.
Exactly. And I really have my doubts that religion will die out anytime soon, at least in our lifetime. And it's really more of a question for future generations of aspiring atheist activists. Like, if you had to give any advice or any wisdom to pass along to younger generations of atheist activists, you know, what would you say? Since I got both of you today, which is outstanding, by the way.
Go for it.
I didn't plan that either, by the way. I was just yammering on.
You
know, people will ask me what, and whether it's you or whether it's your kids or grandkids, what can I do? Beyond play to your gifts and do what you love. One of the biggest misconceptions that I think people have when they talk about, and I'm not sure I'm a fan of the term movement atheism, because usually it's a pejorative, but what can I do to be an activist? And I'm like, well, just be you. Be a loud, proud, secular person. Dr. Ryan Cragen down at the University of Tampa, he's a sociologist, and he's got some great research that talks about what really changes people's minds out there. And without a doubt, without question, the best influencer, if that's a word, is changing somebody's social circles. So by you being out and being a non-believer in deities and living your life just your way, do your job, raise your kids, do your stuff in full view of everybody else, people are now finding it much harder to put you in their box. And those that come to the point where they're doubting or seeking or wondering or curious, whatever, they can come to you because they already see you as a 3D, accessible, lovely human being. You are being an activist, whether you mean to or not. And it's in those environments where conversations begin, and conversations are where minds are changed.
That's excellent.
I agree with that. Yeah, do what you love, do what you're good at. Realize that, you know, hey, if it turns out you're really good at speaking or debating, by all means you can do that. The way to get started with that's the same way pretty much everybody else did. Just have the conversations, have them online, have them in person, kind of, you know, develop the skills of having those conversations. And yeah, you can go on and debate. But on the other side of this wall, there are activists that you're probably only going to ever know from the fact that their names pop up at the end of the show. And they're out there doing all the work to make sure that all the people who show up have a good time, and we try to negotiate parking and stuff like that. They make sure that the audio stuff works. They're working nonstop. They don't even get to hear the show, but they see the effects of the show. And for every organization that's out there, every organization, every atheist or secular organization has some need that isn't being filled. If you're an accountant, organizations need accountants. They need people to be able to sort out donations. And if maybe you're good at advertising, maybe you're the kind of person who just likes to show up, set up chairs to take them down. All of these things contribute to the movement, to the larger movement. There was a caller that was on hold that accidentally dropped, I assume, or hung up. And their question, I was going to get to right after Vincent, but they were gone.
Right.
And they said basically, if atheists are right, why is it that that atheism has no traction in society? Why are atheists losing if atheists are right? So first of all, to answer his question, whether or not somebody's right is independent from whether or not their view is popular or anything along those lines. So he's already framed the question wrong, but he's even more wrong because we are winning. The non-religious, the nuns, are the single fastest growing religious identity, at least in the West, if not the world. There are more and more atheist conventions, gatherings, shows, podcasts, books. The younger generation is increasingly less religious. Whether or not that lasts, you'll have to wait a while to find out. We're not losing. The world is becoming more secular. There is less religious privilege everywhere we look. It's still out there. It's not going away anytime soon. But church attendance is at dramatic lows. There's churches for sale all over the place, and I'm hoping that every atheist organization is able to buy up those churches and use them as community centers, as places to meet and have activities, or let's shut it all down and turn those into homeless shelters until we fix that problem. Let's turn it into places for immigrants to come and use that as a shelter so that they're not locked up in a cage. Let's make good use of the resources we have. But no matter what you're good at, even if you're afraid to talk to anybody or anything else, there's something you can do that contributes to moving the movement forward with regard to secular progress.
Yeah, I'm certainly not afraid to talk to people about this at all. I'm very open in it, and I actually really enjoy, discourse, as long as it's civil and productive, of course.
Yep.
But you guys have both given me a lot to think about, and I really appreciate you having me on today and letting me ask this question.
Thanks so much for calling.
Let me throw this out before you.
Good luck, Seth. I hope it's not too nerve-wracking for you today.
He's such a big star. I'm just. So, thank you, brother. I appreciate it. All right.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, guys.
There are three things I want to hit real fast.
Okay.
One is that we are winning, but as a result, we're seeing the fundamentalists getting freakier.
Yeah.
So, and they're louder, which makes some people think that religion's getting worse. But what's happened is the key players are starting to lose their minds.
The same thing happens in the broader social context. You read like Steven Pinker's books, the world is getting better.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that what you see on the news isn't just as bad and doesn't give you the impression that it's getting worse. And it's because the sample set that you're judging the world by is specifically curated because it's news.
I've also seen a narrative out there that's false, that where it used to be, if you had an event or an atheist event, they were so rare that they were like Woodstock. You would go and it was a big thing and everybody would rush out there and want to be a part of it because they'd been in the desert and they were seeking the oasis. But atheist events and communities and stuff and podcasts and everything else became so ubiquitous that the urgency was not there. So what happened was, is if they didn't have a huge crowd or they had to cancel an event because there was admittedly lack of interest, somebody would spin that as a narrative that the atheist narrative has lost or atheism is losing, and I just think that's totally opposite, right?
Yep.
I mean, it's normalized. It's less urgent in many places, so if you have an event and there's an event on every half block every other week and you do that for years, there's going to be a little bit of a numbing effect out there. The third thing, and I'll make it fast, is that I really want to keep an eye on and encourage the 30 and unders, because religion being less and less and less of a thing in their lives, right? They don't need church. They don't want to judge people the way the Bible says you must, whether it be gay people or otherwise. But there also seems in many cases to be a lack of urgency in their lives. They don't see a need to be an activist or to speak out, because to them religion's kind of a non-thing for them. I mean, you see that at all?
Yeah,
and I'm not talking about like
is that
Secular Student Alliance and stuff, but I mean the culture as a whole, right?
Yeah, but one of the things is, so there's this fallacy that I talk about all the time, the fallacy of relative privation, which it suggests that you should only worry about the biggest problem. And so, when somebody's complaining about X, somebody will come in and say, well, why are you complaining about that when this is a much bigger deal? And it's a fallacy because there's nothing that requires you to only or primarily focus on the biggest problem. And if everybody did that, it doesn't mean you're going to fix the problem. And there may be other problems you can fix that don't go away. I think that for a lot of the under 30s, where religion isn't that big a deal to them, they're not necessarily aware of the broader effect that religion has on society, the fact that it encourages people to vote a particular way, to enforce the policies. And so some of them are focused more in a political sense on the policies which are problematic. And that's a good thing. I mean, we should all be focused on as many things as we can actually contribute to fixing. But you work where your expertise is. I don't go out and get a deal with political policies as much because my expertise lies in the philosophy and religion and things like that. I see a good portion of that under 30 crowd actually becoming active, but probably not to the extent that you and I might think is warranted.
So they're active. I mean, they're active in a political process and a cultural process, but they may not be fully aware of the fundamentalist religion underneath a lot of that stuff.
I hope so, because not only are we reliant on them to fix things after, you and I are in rocking chairs talking about the good old days, which were the bad old days. They were always the bad old days. The world's getting better. Not only are they needed for that, but I worry, as you're pointing out, of a potential numbing effect to where either there's so many problems or they're so focused here that things get missed, or that we aren't as upset about some things as we could be. And I agree. I'll be the first one to say, I don't think that religion as a whole is the biggest problem in the world right now. I think there's a much bigger problem, which is a lack of skepticism, a lack of critical thinking, and a lack of humanism, which ultimately leads to and reinforces religion, but it also underlines and underscores all of these other things, bad policies and a lack of empathy, or I think all of that stems from a deficiency in critical thinking and humanism in particular.
Preach on. Preach, brother.
That's why I'm here.